Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. We are at the start of the 2042 preseason. It has been a relatively uneventful offseason for our Buffalo Wings this year. Just two free agent signings. Reliever David Rivera, we signed to a 3-year deal that we felt was pretty reasonable, $1.4 million a year for 3 years. And then we signed Juan Ramirez out of Cuba, the 23-year-old, to a $4.5 million contract. So we will potentially have his rights next year. The reason that's important to us is that both of our catchers who are likely to be on our 26-man roster this year will be free agents after this season. And with the recent trade away of another catcher, Mr. Barrios, Ramirez, conceivably, if he can get a little better at making contact, could be our starting catcher next year and could be our catcher of the future, given his good defense, his durability, his ability to draw walks and hit an occasional home run. I think he could be a decent major league catcher, or actually we think he could be a good major league catcher if he can get that contact up another 10 points. So our goal is to have him in AA and or AAA this upcoming season. I mentioned we also made a trade where we traded away Mr. Barrios, the longtime catcher in our organization, former international amateur free agent, picked up who we think will be a decent hitting first baseman for us down the line in Frode Brodert. Don't know that he's ever going to be a all-star caliber player, but think that he could be a pretty interesting left-handed hitting first baseman for us. Seems like he's got some good pop in his bat potentially. Another guy who will likely be in the minors for another season or two. Ramirez probably only in the minors with us for 1 year, and then either he's our starter next season or we move on from him. Brodert could take a little longer to get up to the majors. Still waiting to hear on a number of international amateur free agents. We did sign one of the two 5-star players that was available this year, and you can see what we've done since then is spread a decent amount of money around to 5 players at this point, including Juan Giron, who we've been chasing for a little while at this point. We'll see what happens with these offers with some of these second-tier international amateur free agents as we try to bolster our team in terms of the depth that we have in our international complex. With the trades that we've made and the limited action we've had in free agency this year, we've got a little bit of money available at this point. Scouting back where it was a year ago at $18 million, at this point we're going to bump player development up another couple million to the 38 that it was at a year ago. So we still have about $6 million to potentially spend. I don't really see us doing much of anything in free agency over the next month or so. Just signing some guys to minor league free agent deals to bolster our farm system. Once we get into spring training, if the prices on a guy or two who have just lingered on the market for whatever reason really come down, could spend a little bit of that money then. Otherwise, as often is the case, we'll have some money to take on salary and trade during the season and or overpay or pick guys who are looking for a little more than slot when it comes time for the amateur draft in June. So the goal for this episode is really just to make some final changes, as I mentioned, potentially to our minor league teams, bringing some new players on board, getting through spring training, figuring out exactly what the 26-man roster is going to look like, finding out if we sign any of those international amateur free agents that I mentioned, and then hopefully hitting the beginning of the 2042 season and our attempt to defend our World Series title with a healthy 26-man roster. And we're finally going to drop out of the bidding for Juan Giron. You may remember him from the previous episode. Was a guy who was not looking for all that much money that we felt could be a decent bargain. We have, as you can see here, offered him $650,000. Now he's come back saying he's looking for $1.4 million. Given that, unless he has some extreme talent change randomness that goes in his favor, he's kind of a nice fourth or fifth outfielder if he fully develops. We're not going to change him, and we're going to perhaps offer a little bit more to Luis Espinosa, a shortstop that we've now engaged with, and potentially try to maybe sign 3 or 4 of these lower tier prospects to bolster our international complex a bit in terms of volume. And we've made it to the start of spring training. We're going to go with our usual 6-man rotation during the spring. Barajas, Mendoza, Lance, Barbarito as our top 4. Probably not surprising. We're going to give Espinoza the first look as a 5th starter. And then we're going to go with Chris Lott, the youngster, as our 6th starter. He is the 2nd-ranked prospect in our organization, number 64 prospect in baseball. Still a little bit away from the major leagues. Do certainly have other guys who could be in the mix to start for us. Pat Cheek, Ben Borgian, even Damari Hainsworth. But unless Espinoza is a total disaster as the 5th starter during the spring, probably going to give him a chance. Another guy, Luis Palencia, clearly in the mix after a nice year in Albany for us last year, and the fact that we signed him to a long-term contract. But Lott is potentially a more frontline member of our rotation down the line. So want to see what he can do against major leaguers this spring, or some major leaguers this spring more accurately. He will likely be starting the year in AAA, but as I said, still want to see what he can do in the spring as a member of the rotation. And I'm going to try to get as many guys playing time as we can, kind of a more traditional lineup against right-handed pitching, against left-handed pitching, just trying to get some different guys some playing time, look at as many people as possible. There are certainly a couple bubble decisions that we'll be making with this roster, and hopefully about a month from now we'll have a better sense of who should be on the bubble, who should be off the bubble, and who will ultimately go north with us to Buffalo. And we've made it to the end of spring training. It was an incredible spring for the Buffalo Wings, 23-7 record for whatever that is worth. Not generally a ton of meaning to that when we get to the regular season. With all the guys on our roster, you can see it doesn't look like we have much money available, but once we go from 53 players down to 26 players and cut this team in more than half, we'll have some more money to spend. The rotation kind of was the excellent rotation we thought it would be. Barajas, Mendoza, Lance are locked into those top 3 spots. No reason to move on from Eric Barbarito as our 4th starter. Espinoza did a good job, and Chris Lott, the youngster, put up a 1.64 ERA with a couple of wins and 11 innings pitched over 3 starts. So nice work from him as well. Going to have some difficult decisions to make, not just with our position players, but also with our pitching staff to get down to 26 players that we're going to head to Buffalo with to try to defend our title. Won't say it was easy to pare down to 17 pitchers, but the moves were more obvious than some of the ones that we're going to be making now. Still need to get this pitching staff to 13 pitchers. Ben Borgian, the lefty who had been up with us a few seasons ago, spent all of last year in Albany, still has a option year left, so we're going to demote him to AAA. Nelson Davia, you may remember, he was our Rule 5 pick a year ago. Did fine at the major league level, but had never played above high A ball before that, and was slightly below replacement level despite the decent numbers that he put up. Did allow 10 home runs in 49 and 2/3 innings. So we are going to send Mr. Devia down to AA Utica. Still have 2 more decisions to make that will probably be even more difficult than those, given that we have limited players with option years left to choose from that we'd be preferring to send down to the minors. And we've made our final 2 decisions. Luis Palencia, the 25-year-old reliever, we're going to send him down to AAA since he's not going to be a member of our rotation. Rather than having him pitch randomly at the major league level, we're going to send him down to AAA, even though we've signed him to that long major league contract where we can... why does he have to be on the active roster the entire season? Hold, please. Yeah, he doesn't really need to be active. You may remember that he was a guy who, when we were rushing to finish episode a couple of seasons ago, we had been talking about putting him onto the 40-man roster, and we had just forgotten to in a rush to finish the episode. So when the Mets picked him in the Rule 5, we pulled him back from them. But apparently because of that, he still was checked off to have to be on the Rule 5, be on the major league roster. But since he's really technically our property, not the case, or not our property, but we have his rights. So we'll send him to AAA. The final cut is going to be Austin Britz. This is a guy who's been a bubble guy for us, a scouting discovery from back in 2033. He's been real successful in AAA Albany the last 2 years. Unfortunately, he is out of option years, so we're going to have to waive and DFA him. Hopefully, he will make it to AAA Albany for us, and nobody else will pick him up. Wasn't an overwhelming interest in him in the trade market, so just didn't bother spending the time to put something together there. So we'll still be massaging the actual roles for these people. Joe Scott will be our closer. Ruckel will go back into that stopper role, and then we'll figure out the rest of the roles for the relievers. But the lefties, Ruckel and Drawn, the right-handed closer, Scott, and then Robbie Farrell, Chris Powers, Pat Cheek, David Rivera, and Damani Hainsworth, the rest of the bullpen for us. Hainsworth was the other one that I was closest to moving on from instead of Britz. Again, not incredible trade value for Hainsworth. He's been a good, solid reliever for us the last 2 years. Also a great influence in the clubhouse. Making a bit more money, but we've got money to spend right now and felt that it's a team that is trying to repeat and trying to win it all. Wanted to go with the more proven veteran in Damani Hainsworth. So certainly expecting that this pitching staff will be pretty effective for us once again. And we definitely have some high-end talent in terms of prospects and guys with some major league experience in AAA if we do have any injuries or ineffectiveness. So we figured out the roles now. As I mentioned, Barajas, Mendoza, Lance, Barbarito, and Espinoza as our 5 starters. Barajas, Mendoza, Lance, and Barbarito were all in the rotation for us a year ago. Joe Scott back as our closer, Nate Ruckel back as our stopper. A little bit of turnover in the setup roles. We're going to give Pat Cheek, who split last year between AAA Albany and a brief stint in the majors, a chance, as well as David Rivera, who you may remember we signed as a free agent this past offseason. Give those 2 the first opportunity to be our setup guys. Chris Powers, who we really liked in the Rule 5 draft, think he could be a pretty useful player for us. Going to give him a middle relief role along with the left-handed reliever Sean Drawn, who will also serve as a lefty specialist for us. And then the veterans Damani Hainsworth and Robbie Farrell will be our long relievers as we break camp and head to Buffalo. And unlike the pitching staff, I don't think there's going to be any real surprises when we do get from 16 position players down to 13. The initial cuts were pretty easy. No surprises. As expected, we're going to go with Mitch Houlihan as our starting catcher. Walt Miller is our backup. I think that Patrick DeBonis had some interesting thoughts on this following the previous episode, though. I don't know that I'm going to make Miller the starter, except for against left-handed pitching right now. But I think that I am going to have Miller play pretty regularly, even against right-handed pitching, and perhaps even up the, not even perhaps, but actually up the rest status to bench when fatigued. Another percentage point for Houlihan. Goal would be to have him healthy for the playoffs at some point. He's missed 2 consecutive postseasons with pretty serious injuries after performing well in the regular season, but still like the Houlihan and Miller combination. But the goal may be to play Houlihan somewhat less during the regular season, particularly if we get to a point where I feel like we've got the division locked up, and try to ensure that he's as healthy as possible for the playoffs. Rojas will be back for his second go-round. Middle infielders Contreras, Andrus, and Whitehead fighting for time at second and short again this year. Seifu will be back at third base, and Mike Frank, who we picked up in that trade with the Mets right at the beginning of the offseason when we made the decision to deal away Ben Elmquist and Juan Aceves, among others, will serve as our utility infielder this year. So no real surprises among the catchers and the 6 infielders. We're going to take north. 4 outfield spots, as expected, were set. Those were Coma Duran, Ramiro, Velasco, and Josh Porter. So the question is, out of Luis Nava, Jesus Rivera, Edgar Canales, and Tylen Hotaling, which 3 of those guys are headed back to the minors, and which one of them will be joining us here on the Major League team? Since Houlihan is, along with Coma Duran, the only lefties who are definitely going to be on the team as far as left-handed hitters, and we also have the switch hitter Velasco, we're going to go with Hotaling, Canales, or Nava. So unfortunately, Jesus Rivera will be headed to AAA Albany, and he actually needs to clear waivers. So we're going to look to see if maybe there's an interesting trade for him at his age. I don't know that anyone's going to be incredibly excited. I guess rather than talking about it, I could just show you what's out there. Don't know that we want to take on any veteran contracts. Prospects and regulars will be what we're looking for. You can see, looks like a lot of mediocre starters, a lot of decent-ish relievers. Kevin Hale from the Rockies. Don't hate him. And he does have 2 option years left. He'd end up down in AAA for us. He is a left-handed reliever rather than a right-handed reliever. Incredible stamina, but I don't think that changeup's going to develop at almost 26 years old. So just a left-handed arm out of the bullpen, but good at holding runners, some good personality traits, and he's very tough on lefties. So as a lefty specialist, don't hate him. Chris Wood got some incredible pitches in his arsenal. Don't love the well below average movement and control. Not typically the type of pitchers I like to build around. Josh King making a little bit more money. Not the most impressive crew, but I am intrigued by Kevin Hale. I'm going to think about maybe doing a trade for him just because I don't see the right-handed hitting Rivera having much of a future for us. He was an important international free agent signing back in 2033. We spent over $3 million on him. Spent the entire year in the majors in 2040. Most of last year he was in AAA. He's done okay at the major league level. Good personality, respectable defensively, can play a lot of positions, has a cannon for an arm. but he's almost 27 years old, and he's put up a 91 WRC plus and 260 major league at bats. Hasn't quite developed to the highest end of the potential that we perhaps thought he had. And given that he's out of options, rather than risk losing him, I think I am going to make this trade for Hale. Hale with a couple option years left. Going to start the year for us in AAA, but could be a useful left-handed arm for us down the line. And as it turned out, we were also able to get $300,000 cash back in addition to Mr. Hale for Rivera. So rather than risk losing him, we're going to go ahead and complete that trade. It was a more interesting offer there with Hale than I may have anticipated. Now we'll get down to the tougher decision where we actually have a decision to make among the three left-handed hitters to fill our last outfielder spot and our last roster spot for the 26-man roster this year. So we'll take a look at the three left-handed prospects. 24-year-old Luis Nava, center fielder, picked him up in the Bobby Bolig trade with Colorado 4.5 years ago at this point. He's kind of grown up through our farm system, was not a frontline prospect, but he was a pretty solid prospect when we picked him up. Liked being able to get him back in return for what was, from our perspective, largely a salary dump. Hit 266 last year with an 83 WRC plus in AAA Albany, his first full season at that level. Still feel like, although we like his defense, like his ability on the base paths, like his bunting, that he needs to improve his home run power. He still can improve his contact and ability to avoid strikeouts, and certainly looks like a guy in a perfect world, even though he's almost 25 years old, could probably use a little more seasoning in AAA. The other options, though, have their positives and negatives as well. Edgar Canales, left-hander, was an international free agent signing from 2035, a guy we spent $1.5 million on, so kind of a mid-range prospect then. Another guy with pretty good outfield range, decent speed, hit 285 with 16 homers and 78 ribbies last year in AAA Albany. So he is pretty close to being fully developed. Still think his gap power and his home run power and his avoid strikeouts and his contact, for that matter, could get a little better, but just see 5 points of potential growth for him in those categories. He's fragile physically, but does seem, when we compare him to Nava, where we see significant potential upside still in avoiding strikeouts, eye, and contact for Nava. I think the argument, given that this player isn't going to be playing every day, is more strong to have Nava playing every day down in AAA. So we're going to demote Mr. Nava, although he's out of option years too, so that does make it more interesting. Well, we'll take a look at Tylen Hotaling, the last guy on the list. He's a guy who's definitely ready, 26 years old. He has spent basically 3 complete seasons in Albany in a row, hit over 300 each of those years, 22, 33, and 28 home runs, has nothing left to prove in Albany. His outfield range is the weakest of the 3. He is a guy who still does have 1 option year left, but he's the one who looks pretty close to fully developed at this point. We think his eye could get a little better, but other than that, there's not a lot of development that still needs to take place with Mr. Hotaling. I believe Canales still has an option year. Yeah, Canales still has an option year. And he did well in AAA Albany last year. But because there's a little more development that he can do as opposed to Hotaling, I'd rather have Hotaling largely sitting on the bench in the majors. So Canales is actually the first guy that we are going to demote. And now the question is, do we keep Nava up, knowing that he's not going to be playing every day, and knowing that he's got the most untapped development that could probably benefit from playing every day because he's out of option years? Or do we risk losing him? I think a player like him probably gets picked up. So I think the right thing to do right now is to at least shop him around, see what the market looks like for him. Looks vaguely similar to what we've seen from when we shopped Mr. Rivera. Looks like a few more outfielders in the mix here, and a few more outfielders that are a little more major league established at this point. Not that that's a huge need of ours. Third baseman David Sandoval from the Rockies. Not a big time prospect, and he's actually out of option years, so that really doesn't intrigue us at all. Doesn't seem like there's any overwhelming options for Nava. I'm going to spend a little more time offline looking at what the options for Nava are. Broadly, they looks like there's a deeper market for him than there was for Rivera, but I really like that left-handed reliever for Rivera, although maybe we've got an option here with Floyd Auclair. Oof. He's got some incredible stuff. Still has 3 option years left, although he's expected to be making $6 million next year. Right-handed pitcher with an incredible fastball, changeup, and cutter. He's been in the majors for parts of the last 3 seasons with the Blue Jays and put up a pretty impressive 118 ERA plus and a 74 FIP minus. Thing I don't love about him is the lack of control, only a 40. I don't normally go for pitchers with that little control. That said, he hasn't walked in an excessive amount of guys, 55 and 49 over 162 and 154 innings the last 2 years in the majors, and better than 4-to-1 strikeout to walk ratios both years. Doesn't have incredible stamina, but this is a guy that's a pretty useful arm. His stuff is off the charts, movement off the charts, although somehow, or not off the charts, but excellent, although somehow with his ground ball tendencies and his 70 movement, he did give up 25 home runs in his rookie year, but he improved and cut that number down to 10 this year. Floyd Auclair is definitely interesting, and honestly, he could end up, if we pick him up, he's going to go into our starting rotation. But I was thinking there weren't really any real high-end options for Nava, but the fact that we can get a guy like Auclair for him, there was part of me that was going to keep Nava up to avoid having to send him through waivers. But the ability to pick up a 24-year-old who maybe does ultimately end up in the bullpen, but I think he would be incredible in the bullpen. But with the catching that we have, the defense that we have, and the just nasty stuff that he has, although I'm normally reticent to go for pitchers with lower control, the ability to pick up a 24-year-old who throws in the mid to high 90s with an incredible changeup, fastball, and cutter, off-the-chart stuff, excellent movement. The control's not great. The 40 stamina is not great, but those certainly aren't deal breakers for me. To me, this is a trade that I just have to make. So we are going to say goodbye to Mr. Nava. So that does mean, as you may have guessed, that Tylen Hoteling is going to make the roster this year after being the final cut a year ago, is a left-handed bat off the bench. What that does also mean, though, is that we've got a decision to make with our pitching staff now, because Mr. Floyd Auclair, who I guess I haven't technically, I did put him on the 40-man roster just moments ago, but I have not technically put him onto the major league team. We'll be pushing Mr. Barbarito down to the 5th starter, pushing Mr. Espinoza back into the bullpen, and coming in as our number 4 starter. And I think as much as I like Barajas and Mendoza as 2 of the more veteran guys on our pitching staff now, it's very conceivable to me that Jim Lance and Floyd Auclair by the end of our year could be our number 1 and number 2 starters, even though we're not putting them into those roles right at this time. But with the demotion of Espinoza to the bullpen, that's going to leave us with another decision to make. And Damani Hainsworth, despite the good personality, his time could be up with us, given that he's making a lot of money, as I talked about the options for trading him. Actually, I think I looked a day or two ago, Game Time, when I was figuring he was a guy who could be on the bubble. Doesn't look like the most impressive crew for him, but maybe there is something we can do. At the very least, we'll be saving money getting Hainsworth off of the roster. Don't love losing that really nice personality, but we've got Barajas, who's an innate leader, although apparently Barajas was a captain a while ago, and it seems like that comes and goes for some players. Doesn't look like he's listed as a captain personality type right now. But we've still got some good personalities among our pitching staff. I think we could handle losing Hainsworth. So I may look to put a deal together for Mr. Hainsworth. I think Espinoza, and he is out of option years. I guess there's an argument to maybe trade Espinoza as well. He was finally going to get the opportunity to be a everyday 5th starter for us this year until Auclair kind of fell into our laps there. I don't mind having the 3rd left-handed arm out of the bullpen, though, so I think Hainsworth is probably the guy that we're going to move on from. And we are going to trade away Damani Hainsworth, making over $4.5 million this year, and he's going to be a free agent after this season. So for a guy who's a borderline roster player for us, despite his really good personality and despite the fact he's been a good reliever for us the last 2 years, feel that a right-handed middle reliever is eminently replaceable. Not getting anything all that exciting in return, a little bit of cash, a reliever, Arturo Tello, who's got 3 option years left, not really a big-time prospect. He's not as good as Damani Hainsworth, and he's only a few years younger than him. And then Willard Vokey, first baseman, but 26 years old, right-handed hitting first baseman, no speed, poor defense. He is durable. He does still have 2 option years, though, so just gives us a little more organizational depth, even though I think it's unlikely he's ever going to make much of an impact at the major league level. Really, the impetus for this trade is to make room for Eau Claire on our 26-man roster, and also ultimately just get a little bit of cash off the books for the year. We're not getting a ton in return, but again, we're getting that 4.5 plus that Hainsworth was going to make, plus a little cash in return, which will give us more financial flexibility if we have to make more significant moves as we get closer to the trade deadline to ensure that this win now team remains in the mix to win now. So we're going to go ahead and complete the trade, bring on the two players, Vokey and Tello, and we wish Damani Hainsworth the best of luck with the Los Angeles Angels. And with that transaction and the trades of Nava and Hainsworth, we are now down to our 26-man roster. Really like the addition of Eau Claire. I liked Nava, but being able to pick up a guy like Eau Claire felt like it was a deal we had to do all day long. Don't love moving on from Hainsworth, but again, as much as I like his personality, he's a generic right-handed middle reliever at this point, which is pretty easy to replace, and I felt it was more important to have the third lefty, Espinoza, in our bullpen after he got demoted from the rotation with the addition of Eau Claire. So feel like a lot of the activity this offseason has really happened in these final moments, preparing at the end of spring training for what this team is going to be headed north to Buffalo. You may have noticed our utility infielder Mike Frank was banged up just day-to-day with a thumb contusion, so by the time the season starts on Monday, he should be fine. So no injuries at the major league level to speak of. We're going to spend some time now offline figuring out what all of our minor league rosters should actually look like. You can see we've got a lot of guys in the rookie league this year, and we have changed the settings for the rookie leagues to restrict the ages, which hopefully will help get more realistic results from some of our top prospects at that level. But we're going to make those decisions offline. So in our next episode, we will see exactly what the experts think we're going to do on the field this year when we put this 26-man roster through and run our preseason predictions. And then we will also play the first game of the season and see whether we can get a W as we attempt to win our fourth World Series championship overall in Buffalo and repeat for the first time ever in Buffalo. And we'll get the 2042 season started in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.